Kia ora, everyone. On behalf of SpaceBase, who is basically sponsoring this event, welcome to TechWeek 2022. This session is back on the moon, New Zealand's lunar space activities. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Just to note, we are also recording the event to share to a more wider audience later on. So I'm Emeline Paat-Dahlstrom, one of the co-founders of SpaceBase, and I'm really excited to hear from the lineup of speakers that we have, space experts from New Zealand and the US, who in one way or another have some connection with the New Zealand space activities. So before we start, I'm going to just give a little bit of an introduction for each of our panelists. So first we have Thomas Gardner, the Director of Engineering for Advanced Space, a US space company supporting sustainable exploration, development, and settlement of space. Advanced Space built the NASA Capstone spacecraft, which is going to be launching on Rocket Lab in a few weeks, which is, I mean, that's really totally exciting. Tom has over 35 years experience working on a variety of space programs, including NASA robotic missions, launch vehicles, the space shuttle, and then working for a bunch of space companies like Moon Express, Raytheon, and Lockheed Martin. Our next panelist is Udit Shah. So Udit is the chief engineer for Ceres Robotics, a US company enabling affordable lunar transportation through landers, rovers, and tools for surface operations. Ceres is one of only 14 companies in the NASA Commercial Lunar Payload Services Program. Udit has over 9+ years of developing hardware for cislunar space. Udit is an Edmund Hillary Fellow. Our next panelist is Chelsea Robinson. Chelsea is the Chief Operating Officer for Open Lunar Foundation, an organization seeking to catalyze a peaceful, cooperative lunar settlement on the moon. Chelsea co-founded Generation Zero in New Zealand, a movement to support net zero emissions by 2050 before she co-founded Open Lunar. Chelsea is also an Edmund Hillary Fellow. Our next panelist is Peter Toth. Peter is the co-founder and CEO of Extraterrestrial Power, which aims to become the renewable energy provider for the solar system by providing key enabling solar and technologies for space and lunar power applications. Extraterrestrial Power is founded here in New Zealand and has both New Zealand and Australia presence. Peter is a seasoned software developer and embedded systems specialist. And last but not least, we have Eric. Eric Dahlstrom is the CTO of SpaceBase, a purpose-driven space consulting company based in Christchurch. He is also the national rep for the Moon Village Association based in Vienna, Austria, a non-governmental organization focused on creating a global forum for the development of a moon village. Eric has over 4 decades of experience working in the space industry, including ISS, the shuttle, commercial lunar spacecraft, and has mentored dozens of space startup companies. So thank you to our panelists for joining us today. So just a little bit of some logistics on how the session is going to go. I'm going to be basically fielding some specific questions to each of our panelists to help us get to know them and their organizations better, and then curate some of the state of the moon activities globally. And then we'll have a discussion about the current activities and potential opportunities in New Zealand, where Kiwis can participate in light of what's happening today globally. And then lastly, I will open up the floor to the audience for any questions. So just use the chat function to write your questions, and I'm gonna curate them later on to ask to the panelists. So hopefully that's that's clear. Let me just remove my spotlight here. Just want to make sure that our panelists are actually spotlighted when they're talking. So essentially, for me personally, like I was born during the Apollo landings, so that was about 50 years ago now. Back then, the race was between nations, but today is like there's really a very different motivation. For most space agencies, we're going back to the moon for science and exploration. But for the commercial industry, there's actually a lot of interest, especially on the moon as a source of resources for the coming cislunar economy and the next frontier. So essentially, there's a lot happening globally now, and it might surprise you, or might surprise it to many, that New Zealand is already playing some part or role in the current activities, as you will learn from our speakers today. So I guess my first question, which is probably actually it's a three-part question, and it's for Tom. This year, NASA goes back to the moon with the capstone missions as part of the overall Artemis program. So this is basically just like as if we had the Apollo program back in the 60s. For the benefit of the audience, can you give a bit of an intro about the NASA's Artemis program, the significance of the capstone mission, and the role of your company, Advanced Space, for making the first steps happen?
Okay, thank you, Emeline. So Artemis basically is the program, the NASA's program to return to the moon. The first person of color and the first woman on the surface of the moon on or before 2025. That was the goal. It's been in progress now for quite some time. It consists of multiple elements. There is a large rocket known as SLS, Space Launch System. There is the Orion capsule, which will carry the astronauts to the surface, basically to the lunar orbit. There is the human lander system, which there's a contract now with SpaceX to provide that commercially. That's under development right now. There's also the Gateway, which is going to be the mini space station, which is fundamentally in the orbit that's in and about the moon, which I'm going to talk about in more detail in a minute. So those are the big four elements. Artemis One, which is the first unmanned version of this system, is scheduled to launch right now no earlier than August. They are having some challenges with their wet dress rehearsal, which they tried last month. They rolled it back to the vehicle assembly building, the same building that they built the Apollo rockets in and integrated the Apollo capsules in. They're fixing some challenges with some valves and things like that. They're going to roll it back out to the pad here, I think probably by the middle of June, and run through that wet dress rehearsal again, with hopefully launching that in August. As far as the capstone mission goes, capstone stands for Cislunar Autonomous Positioning System Technology Navigation Experiment. So what it is this very small satellite. It's only a 12U size CubeSat, and it launches in about 2 weeks, on or about May 31st is what our current launch target is. From New Zealand, from down in Mahia Peninsula, down on the southern end of the North Island, as I like to say. And it is going to depart from the Earth's orbit. It takes about a week of cycling what they call orbit raising by the brand new upper stage developed by Rocket Lab to send it off to what they call a deep space low energy transfer mission. It will go into deep space about 1 million to 1.5 million kilometers, about 1.5 million kilometers. And the reason it calls low energy is because it uses the balance of the gravity of the moon and the Earth and somewhat the sun to return it back to within the vicinity of the moon. By doing that, we save a tremendous amount of fuel on what we call in the insertion maneuver, which is the maneuver we go into what we call the NRHO, or near rectilinear halo orbit. And this is an orbit about the moon. It is not around the moon, but it is near the moon. Basically, it's an orbit that if you're looking at it from a third-party point of view, it would look like a crown as it goes above and below the North Pole and the South Pole of the moon as the moon goes around the Earth. So it's basically orbiting the Earth with the moon. This is the orbit that's targeted for the Gateway system. So the Gateway is designed right now. There's two elements in development right now. One is the HALO human, I can't remember that acronym stands for, Humans Laboratory Orbiter or something like that. And it combines what they call the power propulsion element, and they're going to launch that on a single Falcon Heavy, I believe sometime in 2025 right now is the current target. That is the element that will dock with the Orion spacecraft on Artemis 2 and Artemis 3 as they move forward with the plans to return to the surface. It is also where they will rendezvous with the human landing system. So the purpose of go ahead, sorry. I'm just going to finish the purpose of Capstone.
Yeah.
The purpose of Capstone fundamentally is to demonstrate that orbit. So NASA's never flown an orbit like this before, has no experience in these types of 3-body orbits in terms of these types of missions. So the idea is to take this very small spacecraft at a very low cost and put it into that orbit so that it demonstrates both the navigation and the operations, what kind of tracking requirements we have, and also maneuvers to keep the spacecraft in that orbit, and how much fuel it's taking to do that kind of stuff. So fundamentally, it's a lessons learned exercise for the folks down at NASA Johnson to operate the Gateway. Sorry, that's finishing up on that. So go ahead. Sorry.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to confirm, just for the sake of the audience, that Gateway is just like thinking about an ISS that is orbiting around the moon.
Much smaller, but yes, much smaller. It is scheduled right now to be approximately man-tended about once a month, depending on how many. Maybe not quite that out, because they're only talking about one Artemis mission a year right now, based on budget reasons, and the rest of the time it's fully automated. So the idea is that using this Capstone spacecraft, we learn a lot of fundamentals about the Gateway and operating it remotely, if you will, and doing the navigation requirements to support that.
And can you talk about advanced space and your role in building the actual spacecraft?
Okay. So we were awarded this contract under what calls a Small Business Innovative Research, Phase 3. We had built a system called the Lunar Autonomous Positioning System, which was a software-based peer-to-peer navigation system. That was purely a software system we were trying to employ on spacecraft to do autonomous navigation in deep space. And so we went to NASA and said, hey, you guys are going to the Gateway, would you like to maybe try this out in a smaller spacecraft? And so we came up with this idea of building the CAP system into a spacecraft. So in 2019, we were awarded this contract to go build the spacecraft and fly it in basically, the original plan was to do it in about 18 months. So that started in late August of 2019. So I was a named program manager at that time. My CEO, Brad Cheatham, is the PI of the mission, the principal investigator of the mission. So he owns basically he gets to make all the big decisions and tells me how to take care of it, Tom. So so we hired Tyvek Nanosat Systems, which is now called Tyvek Nanosat Systems, a subsidiary or a wholly owned company of Terra and Orbital in Irvine, California, to build the 12U spacecraft based on their current designs of CubeSats. And then about 6 months later, NASA selected Rocket Lab to be the launch provider for this mission. So February of 2020. And then something happened. I think it's called COVID. Anyway, so that sort of disrupted everything across the entire globe, including our mission. We persevered very strongly through this entire, we started working remotely, obviously, in the spring of 2020. And working with the folks, but when you get around to building hardware and spacecraft, you kind of can't do that remotely. So that kind of had a significant impact on the propulsion systems and some of the other things we were doing. I will mention that one of the big things we had to do was find propulsion that would work with this CubeSat. And we selected Stellar Exploration in San Luis Obispo, California, to build the propulsion system for us. Since that time, they built a similar propulsion system, which they flew on a mission last year, commercial mission in Leo. So we demonstrated that. But in the meantime, because of COVID, because of other things going on with technology things, trying to get the hardware built and tested and flown, both on the spacecraft side and especially on the Rocket Lab upper stage side. The schedule now has us launching in about not quite 34 months, basically about 33 and a half months. So we kind of had a stretch goal of 18 months, and we said, okay, but we hope to get it under 30, and we were on the path to doing under 30, but I think COVID really kind of slowed us down a lot. It gave us, I'd say, between 8 to 10 months of schedule slip based on what happened with COVID. And the fact that just happened, some of the guys at Rocket Lab that were working on the final testing of Photon were tested positive, so there was some downtime there, and it kind of slowed them down. So the latest push on the delay about 2 or 3 weeks is because of that.
Yeah, well, we're looking really forward to the launch in a couple of weeks. So you mentioned earlier that you actually have a video that at least gives a little bit of a background for the viewers about the Artemis program. I think it would be good to show. Okay, let me do one advanced sharing options. Share screen. There we go. Okay, do this one. Share.
So then everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay, so if this is too loud, let me know.
We can't actually hear the
Can't hear it? I'm sorry.
Yep.
Not sure exactly how to fix that.
If you
Well, this
exit
is the-
out, if you exit out of your share screen and then you start again, there's a tick box that says share computer sound.
Ah, okay. Exit out of share screen. I apologize for my lack of technical savvy here. Do you know where that is? How do I get out of share screen? Oh, escape.
right
There we go. Okay. So under share screen, do what now?
It's a little tiny tick box in the bottom left-hand corner that says share sound when you are about to share. Do you see it?
Share sound. There we go. Thank you. Let me start it over again. Sorry.
Still not.
Hang on. Hang on. Is that working?
Somehow it's still the.
Oh,
Like,
all
there's
right.
a faint
I think we're gonna have
sound.
to.
Yeah, so
I'm
I
sorry,
think
guys.
we'll just do it later.
We'll just skip this. I apologize.
yeah,
What's going
let's-
on is it's asking, because it's sharing sound now it wants me to change permissions. I
Oh, right.
whatever.
Maybe you can put the link in the chat.
Yeah, I can do that.
Right.
I appreciate that.
Okay.
I apologize. I thought that was going to work, but I guess
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, so
we can go to the moon, but we can't share a video. I apologize.
so moving on, so we talked about the Artemis program, but there's also other programs like precursor robotic missions that are actually part of this whole program that lays the foundation for human activities on the moon. One program that is sort of like making this possible is called the Commercial Lunar Payload Services Program. And it's really the transportation to the moon and making it affordable. So Udit, maybe can you explain a little bit about what the CLIPS program is about and what Cirrus Robotics is working on as part of the program?
Sure. So the CLIPS program is designed on the basis that NASA is a marginal customer. So traditionally, NASA used to have those billion, hundreds of $1 million missions where, NASA would be leading the whole spacecraft development, science development, and everything. After success of the launch vehicle program that they had, they modeled the CLIPS program after that, saying that let us be a marginal customer. So NASA is one of the many customers that you can fly on a single mission. What advantage that gives to NASA is it reduces the cost to NASA. So to give an example, a mission which would have probably costed about $500 million to NASA is going at around $75 to $80 million at this point of time, and that's a substantial cost saving. On the other hand, it allows NASA to use the commercial capabilities that are out there. So we have about more than a dozen companies actively working on developing lunar landers, and not just small ones, but larger ones. So Ceres is one of them. We were a late entry into the CLIPS program. We started as a company that does surface operations and robotics on the lunar and other planetary surface. But soon we realized that we did have internal capability, and with help of some of our partner companies like Advanced Space, we got into the CLIPS program and started developing our own landers. What we do is we are essentially developing two landers. One is called the B5 lander, which can deliver up to 650 kilograms of payload to the moon. And that's our workhorse. And then we have a larger cargo lander, which can deliver anywhere between 2 to 3 tons of payload to the moon. And so what we do is we've assigned space in the lander. We've assigned resources like mass, power, data that we sell as a package. Some companies in clips would like to say it as it's like FedEx for lunar delivery, but it's a little bit more than that. So we have NASA as one of our main customers, and then we go out to other customers as well. So far there have been other space agencies like Canadian Space Agency, ESA, Dubai Space Agency, Singapore Space Agency, who have shown interest in being a co-passenger with NASA. And then there's a bunch of other private industry and universities that would also like to do that. So it's more like it's more like a concept of sharing the space that you have to reduce the cost and making it more accessible to people. So if someone would have told you that I can like a university payload can go to the moon, they would be like, not possible to the surface of the moon. It's too expensive, but now you can, right? So a small CubeSat size payload can go to the moon at a fraction of a cost, of what they would traditionally be looking at. So
Yeah.
that's what the CLIPS program is. That's where someone like Ceres comes in, who have it's founded by people who have over 30,000 hours of surface operation experience on Mars, and they are converting that experience to something or to a product line that is available commercially to both the governments and non-government entities. So
Right.
yeah, that's what Ceres is doing.
Yeah, and in terms of like long-term vision of Ceres, what are you like focusing on?
So landers is a gateway to the moon, and possibly beyond that. But once you reach, right, you're going to expand. Like you are going to use the resources on the moon or Mars or an asteroid. So our long-term goal is to provide the tools that are necessary to enable operations on the surface of the moon. So you're talking about long-term settlement. So you need to provide the infrastructure to do that. So giving an example, one of the projects that we are working with Peter over here and Extraterrestrial is developing a 50 kilowatt sort of a power station that works on solar power. It's in an early stage, but that's a kind of a long-term projects that we are working on.
That's actually a great segue for Peter. So like we talked about, building spacecraft to go to the moon, and then Ceres as an opportunity to potentially land something on the moon. But now that there's all of those opportunities, we still need a lot more resources to actually stay there, not just visit, which includes like water, food, energy, and whatever in terms of building habitats and stations. So energy needs is certainly one of them. So Peter, tell us about extraterrestrial power and its long-term goal for power generation on the moon, and how are you beginning to make this happen?
Thanks, Emeline. And yes, as Udit said, we are big on energy because we realized the need for energy quite early on. And I like to come up with the railroad analogy of Udit and companies like his are building the railroads, sorry, to get where we need to be. Now, once you arrive, there is nothing. What is the first thing that's necessary? And you've listed a few things that are necessary, but in essence, there is only one thing that's necessary for everything else first, and that is energy. And so extraterrestrial power started off from the simple question of, can we make solar cells on the moon and Mars from surface materials? And once I looked it up, it was quite obvious that, oh, sure, it can. The top of the lunar regolith, you scoop it up, That's 44% oxygen atomic-wise and 21% silicon. Nice, you can start building solar cells. Now, by the time, it's still a bit off that we can regularly send things to the moon and regularly, and there is actually a huge need for power. But that need is going to appear at some point. Like when NASA is planning a mission, and when we are talking about Mars rover, lunar rovers, at most we are thinking about hundreds of watts of power, which is enough for a few traditional light bulbs, maybe. The moment you go bigger, the moment, think about what's the power rating of your car engine, easily in the above 100 kilowatts. 100 kilowatt is already, would be two of those lunar vertical solar array technologies, the scaled up version. So ultimately, we are going to need megawatts and gigawatts of power, which we will be looking to provide in the future. Now, in the meantime, we are working on a step back, a step closer to home, on solar cells for satellites. It came about as a realization that if we are able to make solar cells on the lunar surface, and we had our plans how to make that happen, we realized, like, wait a minute, satellites need power as well. And then we realized how expensive satellite solar cells are. So 1 watt of satellite solar cell, which is about this much, it is $250 US. The terrestrial counterpart is about 2,000 times cheaper. So we've embarked on that journey to make a much more affordable terrestrial technology-based solar cells and use them in space, and use them for satellites, use them for lunar explorations. Yeah, long-term goal. When we can make solar cells on the moon, that's looks long enough right now.
Yeah, really fascinating. Yeah, looking forward to like having settlements and being extraterrestrial power supplying all of the power.
I'm looking forward to that as well.
Okay, so then now that we again, we're just sort of following this this storyline of being able to get to the moon and also kind of like staying there. So now that the frontier is sort of like opening up and there's more and more players, it's not just government and commercial big organization, but also like startups as well. So there's now kind of like a lot of concern about how this could turn into, you know, quote unquote, a gold rush in space and a free for all. And so recently there's been some kind of like movement on how to mitigate that by creating you know, guidelines, like the Artemis Accord, which New Zealand has signed along with about 18 other countries now. These are basically like guidelines for rules of engagement. So for Chelsea, maybe Chelsea, can you give the audience a little bit of an introduction about the Artemis Accord? What are the guidelines today for the moon, and how Open Lunar plays a role in ensuring that we could do things on the moon and do things more equitably and sustainably?
Yes, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the SpaceBase team for putting this on. I'm aware that I'm mainly in a room of engineers, and I'm very curious what the audience is made up of, because my background is not engineering. I'm an earth scientist. I studied how do we work with the planet Earth, how do we work with Earth systems and govern it well. So how I come into this conversation is from a very different standing point, but it's very aligned in regards to how do we steward this planet and how do we steward other planetary bodies as well. So just for context, that's where I'm coming from. I work with the Open Lunar Foundation. We started Open Lunar at the end of 2017, and it's really all around how do we get it right on the moon? You know, we all have a relationship with the moon, whether it be, you know, these mission architectures or a more cultural viewpoint of the moon, whatever it might be. So how do we get it right? And so to your point, Emeline, around, you know, we're in this new phase, how do we behave together? And I would be absolutely fascinated to hear, you know, from other panelist standpoints as well. You know, how do you see this? In our organization, we do, you know, we have followed very closely all of the developments in policy, and that's the category that I would put Artemis Accords in. So, you know, for people who are less familiar, space policy is made both nationally in each country, but also internationally at the UN level. And the Artemis Accords is sort of this interesting development of the past couple of years, where under the Trump administration, there was a shift from the Obama era was all about Mars, and then the Trump administration created a focus from the US looking to the moon and saying, let's relive the golden days of the Apollo era. How do we sort of recreate that feeling, and appealing to the nostalgia of the US population as well in that process? But on the policy side, it was quite innovative because, you know, going back to the 60s, that was a time when a lot of international policy and agreements were being made. And there was a lot of consensus being built in a context of war, post-war and pre-war. There was a context of hostility, and yet at the same time in space, countries were able to come together and ratify the Outer Space Treaty, which to this day governs every activity. Now, the Artemis Accords is a contribution to that body of work from the, you know, standpoint of the US government. But at the end of the day, it is not a treaty, it's not law, it's just a political statement to basically say, we are going back to the moon, and this is how we are going to approach it as the United States government. And as we do so, these are some of the things that we are going to commit to in our code of conduct. And anyone who works with the United States on this program or receives funding from the United States program is part and parcel of that set of agreements as well. So the agreements cover a whole lot of different territory. I made a little list earlier to kind of just review a couple of them. So for example, there are some basic things that the Outer Space Treaty requires everyone to do to help each other out. So emergency assistance is featured in the Artemis Accords. This is a non-controversial topic. If two astronauts from different countries are in trouble, they help each other out, plain and simple. But on the other end of the spectrum, we also see the Artemis Accords actually stretching where previously there wasn't a consensus. They're sort of pushing the boat out to make some new proposals on certain topics. And to your point, Emeline, about this sort of quote unquote gold rush risk, they do actually begin to address the resource management side of the equation as well, under 2 points, one under space resources specifically, and also one around deconfliction. So if you're kind of interested in nerding out on this more, there's quite a substantial section in the Artemis Accords called the Safety Zones chapter, or the section on safety zones, which I would say it has the most new content compared to the rest of it, which is sort of reaffirming mostly the statements made in other environments. And so what the, you know, this kind of body of work is trying to do is to help countries come together to form some sort of baseline agreements to say this is how we're going to operate together. And one example of that is the idea of carving out certain operational zones around an actor who might land on the surface of the moon, and saying, what protections do they have, and what rights and responsibilities do they have when they're landing or even not landing? I think orbital resource management is equally valuable. You know, Capstone, as Tom was describing in fantastic detail, is in a very particular orbit where, you know, they're looking to put the future gateway system installation. And what are the rules and regulations or sort of conduct around how to interact with something if it has stated clearly that it's going to operate in a certain orbital area, in a certain region? What rights does it have to not be interfered with? And what are the permissions processes to get, you know, aligned on how to avoid collisions or whatever might occur? So that's a lot of what we see in that body of work, Emeline. I'll just pause there. I'm not sure if that covers your question.
Yeah, thanks so much for that. And I think, and we'll probably cover this in the other questions later on, but this is, I think, a really important sort of like topic that New Zealand can have a voice on, and maybe become sort of like the template for the rest of the world to sort of follow. So I'm really excited about this. But just before we go forward, can you also give a little bit more of what Open Lunar is working on like right now in terms of your current activities?
Yes, and absolutely. And we're a nonprofit based in the United States, but we operate globally. And I'm a New Zealander, and we also have another staff member in New Zealand. So we do have quite a strong New Zealand relationship. So Open Lunar Foundation, in a nutshell, we're working across technology and policy to find new ways to help the lunar community cooperate towards a peaceful long-term human settlement on the surface of the moon. And so some of the if you break it down and you think about what's it going to take to create a settlement, you know, you've got Peter's important point about the role of energy systems, but not just energy systems, but any system in which we are sort of required to cooperate to survive. Robots need certain things for survival. Humans need certain things for survival. How are we going to work together to make this work? And so that's really our domain. And so we operate across things like open source technology development, all the way through to standard setting environments and sort of convening and holding discussions around standard setting for lunar actors, all the way through to really individual one-on-one relationships with specific CLPS missions where they might be actually doing something for the first time, like no one else has ever done a certain thing before. And then we work with them to say, well, what does that mean? Like, if you're going to be the first person to ever do this, that means you're setting a precedent, even if you don't necessarily realize that you are. Let's talk about what that means for the community and the ongoing effect of that precedent. And those things become important when you think of things like this sort of gold rush mentality. What kind of precedent do we want to be setting, right? But we also work with states and on their policy packages. So with small states, large states, figuring out what should be the arrangement. You know, a lot of countries don't actually know what arrangements they would like to see yet. And to your point, Emeline, there's so much room for leadership in this regard. There are a small handful of states, you could count them on less than half a hand, that have a passionate and forward-thinking view on some of these topics. And then the rest of them are just kind of either waiting for someone else to develop a position, or they don't have time, which is fair enough because countries have a lot going on. But if you are in a nation state that has the capacity to be forward-thinking on these things, and New Zealand does, and New Zealand is in contact with us about these issues. Today, you know, you asked the question, what are we doing these days? We have two major focus areas right now. Number one is resource management. How do we share stuff together and use it and all of that? And the other one is actually communication systems. Everyone's going to need to communicate with each other. Even missions that right now have fully independent systems from one another, at the end of the day, they need little radio systems that ping back to Earth. And then, you know, the ground stations on Earth validate, this is the position, this is the, is it still alive? These sorts of things are essential for mission control and mission operations. So we're really hoping to do some experiments in regards to collaborative and cooperative systems for lunar communication architecture, so that we could have a really, really great resilient system for perhaps something along the lines of, you know, looking at the history of the internet and thinking, how did we do that? And we're going to have a similar thing in cislunar space, where everyone's going to need to be talking with each other. So how do we want to set that up? And what institutions would we like to govern that system as well? Or will it just be provided by one actor? Is Amazon going to extend AWS to the moon? And are we okay with that? Do we want that type of monopoly? And if not, then how do we construct something different instead? So that's a lot of what we're looking at the moment. But yeah, if anyone, you know, here today is you know, from an organization that wants to think more about this but doesn't feel like they have the capacity in-house to do so, that's a lot of who we work with, is basically to say, like, you know, advanced systems, or, you know, anyone, just oftentimes you're just doing the trade study on what propulsion system to buy, and then you don't actually think about what the other implications of the missions are. And so that's where we become a really useful partner to people. But I would also, you know, if we end up having time, I would love to hear from other people in this call today about, you know, what the upcoming precedents are that we think might be being set without us knowing, or, you know, what are the firsts that we expect to happen in the next couple of years? Because if we're aware of that, then we can do them the best we possibly can.
Yeah, well, thanks so much. Yeah, it's really great to see that there are organizations right now like Open Lunar who's really forward thinking and looking at all of these that's happening actually nearer than most people think. So maybe just as a segue to that as well, thinking about what you know, globally, like other space agencies like NASA and ESA are trying to kind of like involve other countries, for example, in the Artemis program, and then commercial companies as well. There are several organizations that have formed in support of this kind of on a global scale. which includes like the Moon Village Association. And so maybe Eric, since you're the national rep for the Moon Village in New Zealand, can you tell us more about what the organization is all about and what avenues are there available for individuals and organizations kind of like around the world and especially here in New Zealand to be involved?
Yeah, thank you. I definitely realized that this is a big change from Apollo days. I mean, this is all these groups in NASA, ESA, and around the world are trying to get more involvement with and opportunities to be involved for people around the world. And so the Moon Village Association was inspired by the European Moon Village program, which is basically their concept of a European lunar base. And that was 5 years ago. But the Moon Village Association has expanded to involve their national representatives from 50 countries now. And they have about 600 people involved in technical, like 9 working groups and projects. So it's looking at everything from the technical aspects of architecture of how you get cooperative projects from many different sources of contributions, a mix of government and commercial, to the governance issues like Chelsea was talking about, to the cultural considerations and other kinds of projects that how to involve emerging space countries, how can people be involved around the world. And so it's so part of the Moon Village Association is to offer these opportunities for people around the world, but also it's trying to give people in countries a voice in what happens, how we behave on the moon. And I think that's what's so important for New Zealand, people in New Zealand to participate in this and have a voice, just like New Zealand ended up playing a really important role in Antarctica in determining the Antarctic Treaty and how Antarctica is governed. And in the past, New Zealand has just a long history of exploration. And for me, the moon has there are different aspects of why we want to explore the moon and use the moon as a stage for the rest of the solar system. It's all these different motivations from science, because the moon is a record of last 4 billion years, including a deep freeze at the lunar poles, to exploration, to learning how to live in the solar system off the resources in the solar system, the space resources from water ice on the poles of the moon to, like Peter was mentioning, the oxygen and silicon and everything you need to make a solar cell is there. And then first steps in settlement for how we move into the moon, asteroids, and Mars and the solar system. So it's so I think a lot of how we're going to operate in the next few hundred years are being decided now, and so we need to make sure that there are opportunities for people in New Zealand to be involved and also have a voice in determining how we operate in this new environment.
Great. You talked about opportunities. So actually, that kind of segues to our next. I want to kind of focus now more on New Zealand and the potential opportunities out there that are available. So with regards to the potential for New Zealand right now, especially with its existing space activities, and this is a question for everybody, what do you think are the opportunities available as they relate maybe to your respective kind of activities today? So maybe another way of just starting off the question here is what other operational needs are missing, for example, that maybe an organization or a startup perhaps in New Zealand can fill, that is kind of like a need for this lunar or cislunar economy that's coming up in the near future. Any takers?
I think I'll just mention that it'll be very impressive to see, in a few weeks, the Electron launch and for Capstone, because not only is it Capstone being sent to the moon, but also Rocket Lab is demonstrating the deep space version of the Photon vehicle, and so suddenly people who have ideas about missions to the moon, or contributing parts like communication infrastructure or things like that, you can now say this is a known piece that can contribute to that. And so it's an incredible demonstration of capability that can then be used for other applications.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think that Peter Beck and his team have plans for using the Photon, larger versions of it, for other missions as well. There is a derivative they're building around this bus design for going to Mars called Escapade. There's 2 spacecraft they're building to support that. That's a NASA mission being run by the University of California, Berkeley. The other thing is, our spacecraft and dispenser total mass is about 37 kilos. If you were to convert that into some instruments or even more fuel, they could do their own lunar mission if they chose to do so. Right now, their plan, based on my understanding, is that after they drop us off, they're going to do a flyby on the way back. They're going to go out about as far as we do because of the physics, and then come back past the moon and accelerate and re-enter the Earth's atmosphere. That's the orbit debris plan. But they have plans to do things along the way and take pictures and things like that. They've kept those plans pretty closely held. I'm not sure they thought they could actually do it, because the delta V margins weren't there when they first started doing this, but now I think they have them, because as things progress and we met our requirements, they've discovered margin, let's put it that way. So they are very excited about that as well. Peter has been out there promoting this a little too much as his mission, but in the end of the day, he's a very proud New Zealander, and he wants to show off his wares to the world, as this being like, we're leaving from New Zealand. It was an interesting sidebar on that. I actually didn't know this when I started this project, that there is a New Zealand Space Agency, and that I had to get a permission slip from them to launch my spacecraft. I just got that like 3 weeks ago. It's a very nice certificate with a little, like one of those feathers on top or whatever it is that you guys use for your logo. But yeah, that was interesting. I didn't even know there was such a thing. And now I have a signed document from the Minister of, I don't know, a better New Zealand that says we're going to the moon.
So maybe just to follow up, Tom, so because you actually have built and then also had a mission, what does it entail for, let's say, a New Zealand either research organization to develop a small mission or payload to the moon? Okay.
Well, it all starts with that big F word, funding. Spacecraft, or even small ones, aren't necessarily that cheap in my context. Our total cost for the advanced space side is just under $20 million. And that includes all the spacecraft and all the operations and the navigation and everything else. Some of that came from the delays due to Rocket Lab. So there was some increases because of that. But when we started the project, we had the idea of keeping the actual spacecraft part under 15 million with reserves and everything else, which is very, very small by NASA standards. A NASA mission of opportunity for science missions is usually between 50 and 75 million dollars. Sorry. That's the smallest space mission that NASA tends to fund. But you have to have a really good idea and you have to sell it. I don't exactly know who would fund, some of these private ventures, like on the CLIP side of things, they're sending private payloads on these landers in addition to the NASA payloads. But NASA is fundamentally underwriting most of the non-recurring costs for each one of these launches. So you have to have the funding, and then you have to have this, in my opinion, the right people working on the job, people who understand spacecraft design, spacecraft development and testing. And then you have to have a ride. And I think if Rocket Lab hadn't come along, we would have found somebody else. But in this case, they presented the best option, and NASA bought that option. And that's not terribly cheap either. You know, the smallest rocket that you can sell, that Rocket Lab sells right now, including the Photon, is somewhere in the order of $10 million, something like that, I think. So the total mission cost is somewhere under 30 million for us. But at the end of the day, that's inexpensive by space standards.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
you question, what is the mission going to do? And we're a navigation experiment. I didn't really dive into that too much, but you know, you talked about interspacecraft sharing of information. We are going to be talking to LRO, which has been in orbit now since 2009 around the moon. And as part of that demonstration, show that we can navigate without using the DSN to do autonomous navigation. So it's basically the physics of the problem relates the two spacecraft to each other. And by interspacecraft ranging between them, you can determine which each spacecraft's position is without having to use the DSN to support that. That's the longer term goal, but it is an experiment. We're going to see if this works. So if you see the video I showed earlier, there's a big square antenna on top of the vehicle. That's what's used to talk to LRO. But there are a lot of things that you would want to maybe do in and around the moon. There are a lot of missions that I've seen over the years for doing things like magnetic anomaly detection, up close and personal missions to look at the surface for things like what they call magnetic swirls. There's a fellow named Jack Burns here at the University of Colorado who's adamantly focused on putting a radio telescope on the far side of the moon because he wants to listen for deep space signals, if you will, from stars and quasars and things like that. He's a radio astronomer, so he wants the quiet side before we muck it all up with a bunch of communication relays, which is what the plan is long term. But yeah, there's a lot of opportunity there. And there's also opportunity to participate in NASA missions. Most NASA missions these days has what's known a foreign contribution element. So if you're a scientist or you're an engineer or you're a person who has an instrument or something like that, that you can seek out these principal investigator-led missions and they will accept foreign contributions as part of the mission as long as it's paid for by non-NASA funds.
That's really good. That's good to know. And actually maybe to segue as well, sort of like similar question to Udit. What's the opportunity for also, let's say, a government or a private entity to ride on a Ceres lander or rover?
So I think a part of it is what Tom covered, that, you know, essentially these missions, the non-recurring cost is sort of covered by NASA, but then, you know, someone like Ceres or any other CLIPS provider needs to make money, at least needs to close their loop there. So, you know, the opportunity that we provide is that you could basically, like, you know, a university payload could fly to the moon for some $1 million, like something that is like a 1U CubeSat size to the surface of the moon, and that's cheap, right? So the opportunity that we provide is allow you to fly something to the moon to perform your experiment in a small package or a large package, but then you're essentially sharing the cost. So you know, if you look at launch vehicles like 20 years ago, you couldn't really fly a CubeSat, right? Like before the whole CubeSat revolution came in, the concept that you're sharing the same launch vehicle with hundreds of CubeSat to reduce the cost is a similar model that we are following, and that actually provides the opportunities for countries like New Zealand to who doesn't have the kind of budget that NASA has to develop you know, payloads or experiments and fly it to locations which traditionally would require NASA-like budget. So that I would say is one opportunity. The other opportunity is a little bit different, and that is something that Ceres has been trying to, you know, promote in New Zealand, which is that New Zealand has a whole bunch of you know, talent and expertise, especially in virtual reality modeling and, you know, stuff like that, which not now, but is essential for someone like Ceres who wants to, you know, who wants to go to the moon and provide more and more robotic tools. And with providing robotic tools, you also need to provide a good interface to operate those, right? So it can't be the same kind of tools that you used 20 years ago for the Curiosity or the other Mars missions. as we are doing more and more complex tasks using robotics on the moon, you then need to develop tools back on Earth, which helps you to operate those in a much more efficient ways. So if you look at New Zealand has been a country that has been providing a lot of virtual reality stuff for Hollywood. And we believe that that's the kind of expertise that can then flow into something like developing surface operation software for Ceres.
Yeah. Going back to the challenge of funding, so maybe this is something for like Peter and Udit as well. How do you deal with funding as a startup for working on kind of like further along types of business cases like lunar transportation and extraterrestrial energy?
I'll start and then let Peter go. I think apart from the standard running around investors and trying to convince them that you have a business case, I think it needs a lot of consumer education. So until and unless someone knows, like for example, until I come and tell a university that hey, you can build a 1U size experiment which will probably cost you $1 million, and then you pay me $1 million to fly it, right, costing you a total of $2 million. They wouldn't take the first step of developing it because they do not know that they have an opportunity to fly it. So I think that is one example, but like educating the consumers of the advantages of going to the moon, educating the customers that you have options of going to the moon, and educating the customers of the kind of costing they are looking at is important to actually get it going.
Yeah, thank you. Peter?
Yes, so I guess I should be saying that we've been founded in 2018, and in the last 4 years, it's been a relentless search for actual customers and pivoting, where more support exists. And partially that's why we are in Australia right now. It's a very difficult thing, to be honest, from my experience, especially since when I've started, I didn't have any space exposure. I've come from sort of a marine electronics and software background, but there is, think about like answering to your previous question as well, and where the opportunities lie. If you put the Earth and the Moon up, a lower orbit over here and around Earth, you're still in a very protected environment as far as your equipment is. In lower orbit, you can fly things that are made for terrestrial use, and maybe your computer is not going to crash. The moon is such a different environment. So a lot of opportunities exist on this needs actual spacecraft. The moon needs actual spacecraft as opposed to lower orbit. For some of these CubeSats are, well, commercial off the shelf, everything terrestrial technology. So getting back to the funding, is government funding helps a lot, but the way to get funding, and I think that applies both to Australia and New Zealand, is you have to think of the government as another venture capitalist. They are interested in the customer, and they are interested in the market size. So there is almost no difference between that, but it keeps you honest as well. It's rather than, oh, we are going to make solar cells from lunar regolith. Okay, but who is going to buy it? There is no one on the moon. And in a previous presentation, I've showed up a slide that we had in 2020 when it was like, oh, everyone's going to the moon and we are going to be there so quickly. And most of those timelines slipped. We didn't have even attempted attempted moon landings since 2019, I think. So it's difficult getting back. It's hard not to. It's for us, it was part-time working in other jobs, trying to orientate towards space, but finally we are at the level where I'm full-time on the company, and we are rushing to go to the next milestone.
And that's great to hear, though, as well. So we only have 15 minutes left. Where did the time go? So I'm going to transition to some of the questions on the chat, and then we'll fill it up. If you have any questions, please put it in. I think there's one question for Chelsea here. Do the Accords handle terrestrial base upheaval, such as one country partner starting an invasion?
Yeah, so I've been asked this question before. There's actually an Apple podcast. If you know the Apple TV series For All Mankind, is it called? There's a podcast series that goes with that show where the actors interview experts, and there's an episode on this topic in particular. But the answer that I gave there is, I mean, basically the accountability system for abuses of power and stepping outside the bounds of international law don't exist in the same way as they don't exist for climate change. So we're okay right now, randomly, like, apparently the life just goes on when people are dying in a heat wave of 50 degrees Celsius all over India right now. And yet we shut the whole world down for COVID, right? So there's an interesting problem here, which is, when these transgressions occur and they are sort of in this realm of governance that's outside any individual country, the accountability systems are lacking because there is no international police force. No one goes to task on the people that are abusing everyone else. So I think this is a big question, big open area. The positive side of that is that astronauts are so expensive, and in the sense of they have 20 years of training to fly, that the type of people that would be involved in surface missions would never have that personality type, would never be the kind of people to make those choices, simply because of the selection structure. They're sort of, superhumans in regards to the amount of interpersonal skill, engineering skill, scientific understanding, leadership capability that they're selected for. You're just not going to have, a sort of a bad apple in those mix, because they can't, the people funding those missions can't afford to have bad apples in those mixes. So that's not really going to occur, as far as I understand, as far as, my understanding of the astronaut and cosmonaut programs. But at the end of the day, there's no accountability mechanism other than one we create collectively. A lot of people hypothesize that we might create some kind of overarching lunar management system, some kind of like the organization to rule them all. I think it's quite unlikely that that's going to happen. I think it's going to be a bit more bits and pieces. In the United Arab Emirates, there's an organization called the Dubai Space Court, which is experimenting with trying to be the court of space arbitration. And so it's a more decentralized approach to accountability, where we're trying to sort of set up systems of accountability and resilience and conflict resolution in different pockets. But I don't think we're going to have a unified one-size-fits-all sort of courtroom for these kinds of things. So it's a tricky question, but hopefully that answer covered a lot of the territory there.
Yeah, thank you. Really fascinating. So there's another question. Let's see. This is for Udit. How far along is Ceres in terms of hardware and flight readiness?
So I think the two parts to this, right? So one is how far can you go along without having an actual customer who can fund about $50 to $100 million to build a full flight ready spacecraft and then pay for the launch. So the way we are approaching this problem is we've developed a more of a flexible, adaptable bus of our landers and rovers. taken it to a level of maturity where once we have, payloads in our manifest, we can complete the full development and be flight ready in 24 months. And so that's the first part of it in terms of how we have assigned it. And the way we are able to do it in a 24-month period is we have gone the non-traditional route where a lot of space guys, like people working in space industry, will frown at, or aerospace, is that we are not looking at optimization. So what we have done is we've assigned a lot more margins than any traditional mission could, and these are pure margins, right? So these are not something that we plan to use it for creating revenue at this stage, but eventually eventually we can use that to accommodate a payload at a later stage. But our way of approaching the problem is have enough margins, which allows the spacecraft to be more flexible in terms of changes in configuration, and then be ready for flight in 24 months. So that's where we are in terms of flight readiness and hardware. That being said, we have developed we have a functional prototype of our rover. We've developed a full-scale volumetric model of a lander. We are in the midst of developing a structural qualification model of a lander. And we are also actually planning to start development, a more engineering model development of our rover in the next couple of months.
Great, thank you. Here's another question. This might be for Eric. Is there any public awareness program in New Zealand to gain public support about our part of going to the moon?
No, that's, well, there's different activities, but I think there should be one that's specifically for the moon. And this is an area where, please contact me and to find out how to be involved both within New Zealand and also within the global organization of Moon Village Association. I think there's a number of different organizations that are trying to offer opportunities for people to be involved, and this is one where we can both work within New Zealand and interact globally with these communities.
All right. I don't see any questions here, so I'm going to potentially go back to my original question earlier about the opportunities in New Zealand. Maybe Eric, can you just, because you've been looking at all of the activities that's happening here in New Zealand today, are there other organizations, companies that are already involved that we haven't even kind of like talked about that you should point out?
Yeah, there's a few come to mind that I think we've covered a lot of the near-term activities, which are, for example, there right now the New Zealand Space Agency is not funding lunar mission-related activities, and that's entirely appropriate. That they're concentrating on Earth observing, remote sensing, and things like that. But there's some of the activities that are being described on the near-term projects, but there's also opportunities, I think, if you take a longer-term view. And for example, is I'm thinking of the group Aspiring Materials with Dr. Ellen Scott at University of Canterbury, who's been studying cement and concrete and using simulated lunar material. So I have a little sample of a lunar concrete here, and that have that the main application is a carbon negative cement on Earth, but the potential is for building structures on the moon, including landing pads and things like that. And there's also interesting opportunities on just the problem of growing food in extreme environments. And there's just a handful of places around the world that are experimenting with how do you grow plants in simulated lunar material. In fact, they finally opened up some of the lunar dust from Apollo and did a test and germinated some plants in that just recently. But I think this is a big unknown for the future of humanity in the solar system. And that's an area where New Zealand has unique expertise that would be really interesting to pursue. And so so I think there's a lot of opportunities for people to imagine for the longer term, like, this lunar base and settlements and living in closed environments in these extreme environments. And it's really wide open for people's ideas to come in at this time.
Great. Yeah, thanks for that. So we only have 4 minutes left. So I'm actually, to close us out, I wanted to ask one question, which has always been a controversial question for everybody, is like, why even go to the moon? And why would even, New Zealand be interested in doing this? So in a popcorn, version, if you can just give me a phrase or a sentence why this is, or at least what your opinion is. So let's start with Tom.
I go to the moon because, like you, I was raised in Apollo and I want to go, and this is as close as I want to get to going myself. So I'm going to run a mission going to the moon and explore the moon the best way I know how, and hopefully I'll get to work on a lander on my next project. As Udit knows, we've had some fun with that as well. So that's me.
Thanks. Udit.
Yeah, I think it's about going further than you have ever been and doing it in a better way. Every time you do advancements in space missions, there's always a give back, in the sense that the technologies that you have developed, a lot of that have been used back on Earth to make life better over here. So I think as we go forward, we will be developing more and more such technologies that can then be used back at home.
Great, thanks. Peter?
I would like to start with inspiration as well, but my take is on it. For humanity's long-term survival, we have to get off this planet. Every square meter of this planet belongs to someone, or it's governed by some complicated laws. We have to get out to space, and the first thing in space is the moon. So otherwise we are just launching things from Earth. We have to go to the moon so that we have something that we can build the next level of our civilization at.
Thank you. Chelsea?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think the issues that we face today are the same as the issues that we face in space. Managing a pandemic, managing California wildfires, managing the relocation of Bangladesh's population due to sea level rise. It's the same problem as how to manage a crater on the moon. And we don't have a good system for how to do it. And the beautiful thing about the moon is, like exactly what was said, it's the next destination. And there's very, very few people operating there, Maybe this year, next year, there's 10 to 20 operators. Maybe 5-10 years from now, there's 100 operators. That's a heck of a lot less vested interest than what we have to handle in regards to BP, ExxonMobil, et cetera, and the level of corporate capture and corporate power and vested interest that exists in other issue areas. So my take is, let's get it right on the moon, and let's export and open source how we get it right. Because I think the way that we can cooperate together there will teach us how to cooperate here.
Wonderful. Thanks. Okay, Eric, your last word before we close.
Okay. I think one thing I've learned over the years is just amazed at the vast scale of the resources in the solar system, that from the moon and asteroids and the entire solar system. And so I think in the largest scale, all of human history and all of the exploration and settlement around the world is a prelude to this next phase of moving out into the solar system and bringing life with us, bringing life to these lifeless rocks. And I think now is the most exciting time for space activities and the greatest opportunities, and where people, individuals, can have the most influence over the future of humanity.
Great. So with that, I thank the panelists. Thank you so much for your time and your expertise and your insights. I thank the audience for actually joining us for Tech Week today and listening to just the opportunities and the possibilities that we have for the moon. Thank you, everyone, and have a nice week to all.